Dungeon Siege is a Diablo 2 inspired ARPG everyone forgot about. It was released in 2002, so it's more than 22 years old now. It means Dungeon Siege is allowed to drive cars and drink. Drink red and blue potions to restore health and mana respectively, that is. I wouldn't call it a Diablo clone though. It has some pretty unique features, and as far as I know, Dungeon Siege experience hasn't been truly replicated or iterated on by any other game to this day. It so happens, Dungeon Siege was my first ARPG ever, believe it or not, so I'm not gonna pretend like nostalgia factor doesn't play a role in how I feel about it. Just so you know. Oh, and by the way, I haven't played Diablo 2. Yeah, I know, all my points at the end of the video are automatically invalidated by just that. I've played the original Diablo and quite liked it though. Hope it redeems me at least in some extent. Yeah, I know Diablo 1 is different. Horrible jokes aside, the Dungeon Siege franchise was never huge, but first two installments got warm welcome from gamers and critics alike. The third game in this series, however, wasn't received so well. I haven't played it yet, but from what I can gather, it's a classic case of severe game A is fine, but it sucks as a franchise B game it is. Not sure if it's in the latest ICD edition yet. Anyway, I'm here to tell you about the very first Dungeon Siege game. I'm not a critic and not a super competent gamer for that matter, so this video is not a review, not a retrospective, not a critique, not a thorough analysis. It's a little bit of everything, I suppose, but more than anything, it's a love letter to a solid and rather unique yet undeservedly forgotten game. My goal is to explain you why this game is worth checking out. And don't get me wrong, Dungeon Siege has a fair share of flaws. I'd even argue that some of the main concepts of the game didn't work out at all. But, interestingly enough, it might be to its benefit. You see, Dungeon Siege was supposed to be filled to the brim with heavy action with tactical elements. The tactical part has completely fell off, and despite on the focus on engaging yet, let's be honest, a bit brain-dead combat, Dungeon Siege has a sort of a road trip atmosphere to it. Sometimes it's downright meditative and cozy despite on all the carnage that's constantly happening all around. Not sure if it's how it was intended, probably not, but it works for me. The game this masterfully crafted video is about isn't for everyone, but maybe it's for you. I guess now you have to watch the whole video till the end to find out if it's the case. Wink wink. Dungeon Siege greets you with a rather elaborate main menu, resembling some kind of a mechanism. You start a new game with the character creation screen. Character creation options are very basic. You can enter character's name, select a gender, skin color, face, outfit and a haircut. Options are extremely limited and don't affect anything at all, so you might as well try to recreate a red-haired girl from the cover art, because she is the canonical Dungeon Siege protagonist. At least it's what they say. The hero doesn't even have a backstory and is referred simply as a humble farmer in the intro. To emphasize how truly unimportant the created character is, the game even allows you to dismiss him or her as long as there's someone else in your party. It's the only RPG I know that allows such a thing. Dungeon Siege gameplay is simple as hell. You click left mouse button to move to a designated point, and right click to attack an enemy or interact with objects, containers mainly. You can use melee weapons, ranged weapons, and spells of one of the two schools of magic. No special attacks, no dodging, no crafting, no nothing. There's a lot of enemies, and some of them are as generic as possible, like skeletons, dragons, spiders, flying skulls, beholder things, and some are a little bit more interesting. The level always stays the same, so given the linear nature of the single-player campaign, encounters are mostly fair and enemy's power usually matches your character's skills, even though in certain locations you might experience sudden difficulty spikes. It's always manageable though, especially because you can quick save whenever you want, and health potions are cheap and never a problem to buy. And yeah, I do recommend you save often, because even though Dungeon Siege has autosaves, There are very few and far between, so it can be hours between them, and nothing is more frustrating than losing a couple of hours of progress. Character progression in Dungeon Siege doesn't even require player's choice. You just use preferred weapons or spells, and character level, skills, melee, ranged nature and combat magic, and stats, strength, dexterity and intelligence increase automatically. Kinda like in modern test games, but even more streamlined. You plow through the game's world, looting dead enemies, numerous crates, barrels, chests, sepulchres, etc. There's a lot of equipment with different color-coded rarity and randomly assigned attributes. As usual, the attributes, due to their randomness, don't always make sense. Containers are randomized too, so some of them quite disappointingly contain nothing or even are traps. Booby-trapped containers deal almost negligible amount of damage though. In fact, sometimes explosions even make things faster, destroying nearest crates and barrels, so you don't have to do it yourself. But there's also real exploding barrels, usually in mines. These are not to be messed with, they can kill instantly. The game might seem too simplistic, and it's kinda true for a time, because you start with only one character under your control. When the party starts to grow though, it becomes all about managing the increasing group of fighters. There's a degree of automation in Dungeon Siege, so you can set how aggressive a specific character should be, how far should he pursue enemies, and which targets he should engage first. This thing doesn't really work for me personally, because only one option makes sense in my opinion. It's always better to order to hold ground your marksmen and spellcasters, because they can engage enemies at range and usually don't have good protection. As to melee characters, moderate options seem the best ones, because in other cases they either stand still like idiots or run erratically across the whole map, aggroing more and more enemies. Of course, with the max aggro and pursue stances set, the game sort of plays itself, but personally I don't like games try to prove being smarter than me. It also becomes a tad too chaotic for my taste. The game has tactical pause, so you can plan your moves, switch weapons, spells, and choose positions while pausing. But the tactical aspect of Dungeon Siege falls flat after first serious fight, when dozens of monsters pour from all sides and the engagement turns into pure chaos. Often what is left in such cases is to chug health potions like crazy, hitting H hotkey non-stop while trying to keep your mages from the thick of it. And mages tend to die a lot due to much smaller amount of health points compared to other classes and much worse protection from the equipment available to them. When a character loses all his health, he becomes incapacitated and falls on the ground while his character portrait turns red. If he gets even more damage while being incapacitated, usually it happens because of AoE attack or something, he dies. Sometimes mages get insta-killed right away and drop dead immediately after entering a new room. Thankfully, AI doesn't exploit this weakness, but still sometimes enemies decide to target your spellcaster specifically and march through your ranks due to no collision detection present, and there's nothing you can do. Mages are useless in close quarters. It's very annoying when your party can't advance while mages chill on the ground. Multiclassing is generally a bad idea in my opinion, but it makes sense giving all your characters a spellbook with a bunch of resurrection scrolls and a basic healing spell called Healing Hands. It doesn't require any nature magic proficiency, so anyone can use it. For some dumb reason I realized it way too late and had to suffer through quite long recovery periods this playthrough. Don't repeat my mistake. And death mechanic in Dungeon Siege is a mess gameplay-wise and lore-wise. When a character dies, a neat tombstone appears in place of his portrait and all equipped and carried items fall on the ground. It might not be that big of a deal because you can resurrect your dead characters and pick items again, and there's even an option to pick all items with one press of a button. But when several characters die close to each other, everything drops into a single pile of stuff, and you will have to sort it by yourself then. It might be okay for a couple of times, but it gets old pretty fast, especially when it happens several times back to back. When all your characters get incapacitated or die, you lose. But as long as at least one of them is still alive, you can use Resurrect spell available to nature mages pretty early, and Revive spell available to combat mages a bit later on in the game. But the fun thing is, there are one-use resurrection scrolls you can buy for cheap with no prerequisites required whatsoever. Imagine a world where you can resurrect virtually anyone for a couple of pennies. Yeah, video game logic, I get it, but still. Honestly, not only this death resurrection thing feels silly, it's not needed in Dungeon Siege at all. It doesn't make the game harder, it just makes it more annoying and wastes your time. There could have been an explanation that only special kind of people can be resurrected, but given we can have the whole bunch of folks of different races in our party and every one of them, human or dwarf, can be resurrected, such sort of explanation kinda doesn't work. Not only that, but the Krug, the very basic enemies, a barely sentient race, can resurrect their fallen comrades too. Another thing that wastes your time is trading. Don't get me wrong, it's mostly fun and it feels rewarding to sell expensive hard-earned loot, but the interface is clumsy as hell. Especially it feels so when you're restocking your potions, which you're gonna be doing a lot. The shops are few and far between, like really far between sometimes, so every shopping event is, well, an event, because next merchant might be hours away. Personally, I almost never buy armor or weapons, because usually the stuff you find in the wilderness and quest dungeons is better, but you might not be that lucky to find the spells you need, and certainly you won't get enough potions. What's interesting about the potions, by the way, is that they are not single use, unless it's a rejuvenation potion that restores both mana and health, but I see no point in these. Characters use exactly the amount they need, and leftover stays in a bottle. You can even pour leftover potion from one bottle to another, which is not overly useful, yet neat and rarely to be found in other games. Talking about the interface. Yeah, the game's old and the HUD doesn't scale with resolution settings, making it hard to see stuff even in 1080p, let alone 4K. Also, it's not very well thought through, especially for spellcasting. There's a whole bunch of hotkeys, some of them like H and M for health and mana potions respectively, are super useful and straightforward, and some of them are convoluted and hard to remember. But at least they're there, and you can control a lot of stuff with them. Let's talk about mages a bit more now, because magic is the most nuanced and problematic discipline in Dungeon Siege, at least for me. I'm not gonna lie, I usually prefer the more straightforward approach in RPGs, because bashing skulls with an axe or a sword is usually easier. So it could be my incompetence in magic ways, but I do believe I have at least some valid points on the matter. First of all, mages have only 2 active slots for spells. There's quite a lot of them. Granted, most of them are kinda meh, very situational, but still there's healing spells, damage spells, AoE spells, utility spells, control spells, buffs, debuffs, summons, and so on. Talking about utility spells, my favorite one is transmutation that turns any item, except books, spells and potions, into gold. It's very handy when a shop is too far away and you've already ran out of inventory space. I would assume that exchange rate, so to speak, is worse than in stores, but something is still better than nothing. The problem with the magic system is that to be an efficient mage, you have to switch spells constantly, and it sucks. You either have to open your spellbook and swap spells, which takes a million years, or press and hold left mouse button on one of the active spell slots, a drop down menu will appear, and you'll be able to choose the desired spell from there. It's better, but not by much, because there's no icons, the text is small, and the ordering of spells constantly shifts. It only makes it more tedious that some summons last 3-4 times less than others, So if your summoned pet expired or got obliterated, you're gonna have to switch from your healing above spell, summon a poor thing again, and switch back. It takes time and you have to do it constantly. Just because of that I choose to not to use buffs at all, because constantly switching from and to summon spell is tiring enough for me. And I absolutely had to use summons, I think, because the dealt damage is what gives a character experience, and mages don't deal a lot of damage on their own. I haven't got actual confirmation that summoned monsters' damage actually counts towards character damage, but based on my subjective experience, I'd say it does. At least my mages seemingly level up faster when I use summons, and it does work this way in Dungeon Siege too. Despite a huge number of spells available, there's only so many that make sense. For example, there's only a couple of damage spells that hit the damage mana required ratio sweet spot, so you're probably gonna be stuck with them throughout your playthrough. Obviously spells are level capped, but they also become more effective while your skill grows. So it's gonna be a while till you'll be able to switch your most efficient spell to a new, higher level one. The same thing applies to summons, because some of them just don't last long enough, or move too slow and are always late to the party. The best summons live long and either move fast or shoot projectiles. I haven't even used buff spells or transformation spells that can turn you into an animal, because I can't be bothered to add more spells to my spell switch routine, and benefit from such spells is questionable anyway. Another weird thing is that some spells' level cap is absurdly high, so there is no way you'd be able to use them during the single player campaign. Yeah, you can import your single player character into a multiplayer game and continue leveling up, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Yet another quirk is that mages' weapons of choice are staves. I mean, makes sense, right? Not exactly. As a matter of fact, staves require both strength and intelligence, and being a melee weapon, they level up your melee skill and strength gets the most boost. It's almost like the game encourages you to go multi-class, but it would be an absolute disaster of a decision. The role-playing system has a thing called Uber level, and it determines how easy you're gonna be able to level up your attributes. This stat is not even shown in vanilla single player for some reason. The way leveling works is a bit convoluted, but to make a long story short, the more proficient you become in certain discipline, the harder it gets to level up any other. I'm not gonna explain the whole problem in details because it's gonna be long and boring and I can't be bothered. There's gonna be a couple of links somewhere if you're interested though. What it all means, using a staff as a melee weapon while being a mage, you're not only gonna slow down your magic skill progress, your attacks are gonna be weak, while you're not gonna be able to equip decent armor. Maybe, just maybe there's some crazy OP hybrid build that somehow abuses the leveling system and makes melee mage a viable option, but I'm not aware of it and it's way too counterintuitive and complicated for a filthy casual as I am. The sad truth is, mages suffer the most from this rather punishing character progression system, so again, multiclassing is not an option. All I can say is, choose your discipline and stick to it if you're not planning to exploit the game in some weird way. Your best choice would be melee, your characters will have high HP, good armor rating, high DPS, they still will be able to cast basic spells and resurrect people, and stack of potions would make it up for absence of specialized healers. But it's boring, so I usually try to have all 4 classes in my party, yet 5 out of 8 characters are gonna wield melee weapons, there's no other way around. If you feel like you can go with full mage party, cast 8 summon spells constantly and observe the total chaos of 16 people and creatures rushing around the screen, until first strong area attack takes the whole party down. Dungeon Siege world map is quite big and usually is described as seamless. It's true that after starting the game or loading your save file, you won't experience any loading screens whatsoever, but there's a bunch of lifts and moving platforms, and I'd be surprised if they aren't supposed to mask loading. Some of them take quite a long time, too long to serve just for decorative purposes in my opinion. Anyway, this semi-seamless approach adds weight to the game world in a way, makes it not a jumbled mess of locations, but a fairly believable world with smooth biome transitions. Theoretically, you can travel all the way back from the final boss fight to your shack in the farmlands. What damages this world credibility is pathetically small size of settlements, but most RPGs suffered from this because of technical limitations back in the day, and some of them do today. Extreme linearity of the single-player campaign doesn't help as well, but I'd say it's justified by the gameplay loop. You see, Dungeon Siege leads you a very windy but one-directional path through its world, so nothing stands between you and action, not even the plot, sadly. The only times respite happens are town shopping sprees or when you decide to read quite short in-game books. Very rarely there are branching paths, but offshoot roads end up with a dead end or sometimes a secondary quest site. If not, it will be a semi-hidden location with chests to loot, like this temple in the middle of forest, or a hedge maze properly placed next to the king's castle. One of such places, like this tomb, well, at least I think it's a tomb, near the eastern swamp, I've never even discovered until the very last playthrough. Almost all quests but a couple, designed in a way so you don't even have to come back to a quest giver. Theoretically, you can always move forwards, unless you run out of resources. The flow of killing monsters and looting crates grips you in, and you reach a sort of a meditative state, or get bored. I am not gonna lie, the gameplay loop feels brain dead at times, but it's beautiful in its mindlessness, if it makes any sense. Obviously, a 20-year-old game can't have good modern graphics, but it doesn't mean it can't look good. On release, Dungeon Siege looked great, and is still pleasing to the eye despite unblocky terrain, low poly models and blurry textures. The outdated graphics shouldn't be a problem since budget indie games become more and more popular these days. It's not about the polygon count, it's about the mood and general aesthetics. Dungeon Siege doesn't have problems with that. The starting location, the farmlands, doesn't look all that good, but the more you delve into Dungeon Siege world, the more charming it becomes. And the game even has day and night cycle, and some environments look especially neat in certain times of day. As to audio side of things, the sound effects are fine, and the music, well, I think it's enough to say that it was composed by Jeremy Soule. Soule was the Hans Zimmer of video game music once, well, according to, me, until he wasn't. I mean, I've no idea what kind of guy he is. He might as well be a terrible person. The misconduct allegations might be true, but his work is phenomenal and it's hard to deny that. I wouldn't call Dungeon Siege soundtrack his best work, that honor goes to Skyrim and Dawn of War, but it's damn good and it adds to the game's atmosphere a ton, like all Souls works are familiar with do. There's a couple of problems though, but it's not about the music, it's about how it is used. Firstly, transitions between tracks are not at all subtle sometimes. Secondly, in certain areas the tracks assigned to them are too short, or the tracks themselves were clearly not designed to be played repeatedly on and on. It makes it a bit too jarring. And lastly, there's no combat music. It's always either a quite tranquil or slightly ominous track. Some people say it doesn't fit combat, but it's totally fine with me, because my experience with the game, as I've said, is sort of a meditative anyway. Still, it seems like it's an issue for a lot of people, so here you go. As a segue to discussion of the technical state of things, I'd like to mention audio bugs. Sometimes it feels like the game gets overwhelmed with sound sources and kinda chokes, so some sounds get interrupted or muted. It feels like the game engine just can't handle it. Dungeon Siege is an old game, and a kinda neglected one. Obviously it means technical problems. Thankfully most of them are easily solvable. What's interesting, on my previous, much older laptop, the Steam version had me crashing every time at the very first cutscene, probably because of shadows. The solution was just to disable them. On my current, not so old laptop, Steam version works out of the box. Still, enabling full complex shadows slows the game to a crawl, so if you're having troubles with the vanilla version, shadows are most probably a culprit. Also, you can quote-unquote add widescreen support by modifying a config file named Dungeon Siege INI. You can find it in your Documents folder where the game stores its save files. Anyway, the first thing I did after installing the original game from Steam was following the Legends of Aranna plus Extras guide from Community Hub. It enables Legends of Aranna expansion, which the Steam version regretfully lacks, and brings some bug fixes and quality of life improvements. In fact, this is probably the way to play it. Yeah, acquiring the expansion this way is an illegal grey zone, I suppose, but the Steam guide exists for ages, so probably nobody cares anyway. It might be usual IP shenanigans, since Legends of Aranna was developed by a different studio, now bought by Take-Two Interactive Games, and Gas-Powered Games is now defunct, and Square Enix doesn't give a shit. We will talk about the expansion in slightly more details later. The GOG version doesn't have the add-on either, but it handles different resolutions a bit better and doesn't lock it in main menu in cutscenes, perhaps thanks to GOG DirectX configuration rubber thingy. It might be a better choice if you're not planning getting the expansion, even though probably the Steam guide will work for GOG version too, but you never know. As to mod support, there's a bunch of Nexus mods. There's even a Vortex extension, but it seems like it doesn't support Steam and GOG versions, and I have no idea what version it needs. You can still download and install mods manually though. The heyday of Dungeon Siege modding scene is obviously long gone, yet there's a plenty of mods on Nexus, and probably even more on other sites, albeit with possibly dead download links. Some of my footage is gonna be from the modded game version. Terrible, I know. Anyway, here's the list of the mods I used. CFAR 2020 can be fine-tuned to a great extent, but I left all the defaults. You can use it to increase draw distance, speed up day and night cycle, and do some other things. As always with increased draw distance, sometimes you can see stuff you're not supposed to, but you can't have it all, I guess. High resolution texture pack provides textures upscaled by AI. It looks mostly okay, but it's not perfect. It makes the game look better most of the times, but difference isn't huge, while file size is. Also, allegedly, it makes some assets flicker. Train Peninsula single player, aka UPSP, allows you to play the vast multiplayer map as a single player campaign. There's plenty of other mods that introduce balance changes, new campaigns, and graphical enhancements. If you're wondering, yes, there is a nudity mod. If you are to use it, try not to poke your eyes out with sharp look of the models. Apart from the usual stuff like crispier textures and kinky character models, several total conversions exist. The ones I discovered are Ultima 5 Lazarus and the Ultima 6 Project, fun remakes of Ultima 5 and 6 accordingly, and also Legions of Fairlords, a fun remake of Fairlords aka Rage of Madness, which I'll be shocked if you're aware of. I haven't played any of those, but the fact that Dungeon Siege was such a popular total conversion platform speaks volumes about Dungeon Siege modability, which is a good thing, I guess. Unmodded, the game was mostly stable for me, but you might want to use large address-aware utility. especially with HD textures. It's pretty much a standard for 32-bit CPU architecture era games at this point anyway. Seems like it prevents some crashes, but not all of them. Being truthful, you probably don't need any mods to just play the game, but I wanted to spice things up a bit, so whenever there's a female character portrait in the top of the screen, it's modded GOG version. If there's a male character portrait, it's Team Legends of Aranna fixed version. As Ross Scott from Accursed Farms noted, Dungeon Siege is a journey. What I'm going to do now is to share my version of said journey. It probably won't be vastly different from yours, should you play the game by yourself, but every game is an interactive experience, so each playthrough is unique anyway. It's gonna be a very big part of the video, and I understand if you'd like to skip it. I'm gonna repeat some points, yet we'll talk about them in greater details, and also will give some context on them, so you hopefully can understand better what I'm trying to say. Let's address the elephant in the room. The plot is as cliched and uninspired as it gets. The writing isn't awful, but the game fails to convey the story in a cohesive and captivating way. According to the Wikipedia, it was meant to be simple and unobtrusive not to get in the way of action. Even Dungeon Siege lead game designer Chris Taylor admitted that they might get beat up a bit for going with this much used alternative premise. And yeah, they keep getting beaten up metaphorically for that in every Dungeon Siege related video indeed. I guess the whole plot was meant to justify the long and windy but very linear journey from point A to point B. Is it bad? Well, maybe. Not too bad though. Somewhat deep lore behind the Dungeon Siege universe does exist. The world building pieces are scattered throughout the game, in quite rare dialogues and several pretty short books. The lore got more developed in the second installment, believe it or not, but overall Dungeon Siege world always was a pretty generic fantasy universe with elves, dwarves, several orc-like races, dragons, ancient evil, etc. The opening cutscene itself is probably gonna fade from your memory right after its end. The Great Fallen Empire, blah blah blah, the Mighty 10th Legion, blah blah blah, ancient evil, whatever. The protagonist is but a simple farmer, farming his farm out and minding his own farming business. One day seemingly somewhat sentient creatures, the Krag, attack the farmlands. Our friend Merik, with his last breath, sends us to the closest town, Stonebridge, to find his friend Gyorn and report the situation. We can choose our specialization right away. I'm gonna choose the easiest one, melee. It's also the most effective one anyways, you know. All alone with very poor gear, we travel through farmlands and forests fighting the Krag, giant bugs, all sorts of gnat, wolves, a bear, and all sorts of generic fantasy RPG enemies. Of course, Krag have destroyed the bridge, so we're gonna have to go through the spooky crypts filled with stone gargoyles and skeletons, obviously. It's not a big problem at all, and at the very end of this dungeon, we defeat a giant gargoyle that shoots lasers out of its eyes. It's the first boss and it dies rather fast, at least on normal difficulty. Our true reward for that is a new companion, a scribe called Ulora. Well, maybe it's Ulora, but it doesn't sound that good and I'm gonna be butchering a lot of names here anyway, so who cares? We save her from captivity and she gladly joins us. She has almost no skills, so you can make anyone out of her, and I'm gonna give her a bow. Now you're a marksman, Ulora. Or Max woman? Max person? Don't get mad at me, my English is shite. A little bit of nature magic skill won't hurt though, because she can also cast very basic spells like transmute. Quite useful spells I've mentioned. Enemies' number seemingly doubles, but with the help of our new companion, we arrive in Stonebridge in no time, plowing through the crag and forest creatures. Approaching the town we come across several smoldering buildings, so it seems like Stonebridge was already attacked. Too bad. At last we arrive at our destination. The town is ransacked by the Krag, several people are killed, but Gion is alive. At this point it seems like poor old Merik is erased from the history. Dialogues don't even mention him. Gion laments over his catapult though. The priorities. Anyway, Gion tells us that we have to deliver the report to the overseer of Glacian. That would be the town down the road. He also offers his aid and we gladly accept, especially because Gion is a melee guy. Now we have a whole town to explore with the population something like 10 people. Yeah, settlements in ARPGs were always hard to implement realistically. Remember the capital of Skyrim in TS5 which had 2 streets? Well, I'd always choose a handmade but small areas or a random generated crap. Starfield. Just in RPGs. Even though Stonebridge was raided by the Krag not too long ago, the shops are open and there's stuff to sell and to buy, and even more companions to recruit. Unlike the ones that are somewhat plot reliant, such mercenaries request a fee. It might seem substantial in early game, but pretty soon any price becomes irrelevant. Too bad I can't hire all mercenaries in Stonebridge, so I will go with Zed. He's a nature mage. Yeah, mages are kinda meh in this game, but healing and some utility spells are very useful. I probably should have talked about it earlier, but better late than never. The main difference between nature and combat magic is focus on damage spells in the former case and healing and buff spells in the latter. Despite that both schools have all types of spells, it's mostly about variety and cost efficiency. For example, basic combat magic healing spell called Battle Healing costs more than Healing Hands and has higher level requirements. The same goes with resurrection spells and so on. 2 other would-be mercenaries are a fighter with a drinking problem and a marksman girl with self-esteem issues. Great, this town needs a friggin' psychiatrist. Also, I'm gonna purchase a pack mule just because I need the footage and they look kinda neat and cozy in snowy environments. Even though pack mules are kinda cute, they suck in all other regards. Yes, they can carry thrice as much as a person, but can't fight. A pathetic kick doesn't count. What's more important, they take a slot in your party, and having another human character heavily outweighs extended inventory space, especially because there's no reason to carry a lot of stuff anyway. But come on, aren't they adorable with this random useless junk mounted on these hardy backs? There's also some side quests in Stonebridge. We kinda sorta help the mill lady killing bugs on the shore. She won't give us anything for that, this quote-unquote quest doesn't even have a journal entry, but the triggers are there. It almost feels like a leftover or something. There's quote-unquote real quests too. These are very basic kill someone / something and deliver something kind of quests. There's also a lore book for shadowing a visit to yet another abandoned ruins, riddled with spiders and arachnid-looking things and skeletons and lost souls. After finishing our business in Stonebridge, we move on. We don't have much stuff to sell or to share between our party members, so it doesn't take long this time. And again, it's forests, the Krag, the wildlife, just as before. Expectedly, that doesn't show too much promise from the get-go. What can you do, mages? The frail folk. I'm gonna try to use him to his full potential though. Damage spells, healing, summoning creatures, maybe even some buffs, but probably not because I'm lazy. At some point we come across the tower, clear the tower, quest complete. Yay! That's how deep Dungeon Siege side quests usually are. At least we get a pretty decent axe for that, and another world-building lore book. I guess it's supposed to bring some meaning to the locations we travel to, but Fedwa's way? What? Where? Remember, we don't have an overworld map in this game. By the time we will get there, we will probably forget what we've read. After traveling a little bit more, we arrive at the Western Cross entrance. Skellies, here we come. Western Cross is a little bit less linear, it has some branching paths, secret locations, but essentially it's another generic dungeon with skeletons, zombies, spiders, and a spider boss at the end. If you're like me and you like exploring every nook and cranny, it's gonna take a while still. Also, enemy count skyrockets here, so even if someone would try to play tactical until this point, they'd probably abandon this idea now, because look how many spiders are here. And yeah, arachnophobia warning everyone. I like how there's more books and they have mentions of the Droog and the Sack in them, even though we won't meet those races until the very end of the game and probably will forget everything by that time. At the very end of the dungeon there's a giant room with a whole bunch of different kinds of enemies and mana and life fountains, which are basically useless because health potions are so abundant in this game and way easier to use. Behind the giant door there's a big spider boss, which is pretty standard, but in this particular playthrough he was glitching out, becoming invisible sometimes. Probably the mods are to blame. In the next room there's a giant elevator, whose purpose is probably to camouflage a loading screen. So much for the seamless world, by the way. At last we're on the surface, only to descend into another dungeon in a couple of minutes. We clear the passage to help Stonebridge guards, completing another side quest. Right next to their Western Cross exit, there's a trader's outpost and a dwarven mining town, Glitterdelve. Before we enter the town, another cutscene kicks in. It's supposed to be sad and heroic, I think, but now it's mostly hilarious. Early 2000s jank in its full glory. For second monitor adepts, a bunch of poor defenseless dwarves get killed by Krug, but another, not so defenseless dwarf, kills them all single-handedly. This mighty dwarf warrior is called Glorn, I think, and of course he joins us for free, seeking revenge and asking us to help him in his search for his brother. We gladly accept because we need more fighters and diversity. Yeah, the dwarves are smaller, their walk cycle is weird, but there's no race-related buffs or debuffs in this game, so there's no downsides in being inclusive here. We already have women in our party after all. So much for the lush, warm forests. We go underground again. The Glitterdelve mines are vast and deep and dark and gonna take us more than 1.5 real hours to get through, given we're gonna explore every last bit of it. But while we're still on the surface, have you ever wondered why there's a pack mule monument at the mine's entrance? Well, Glorn has a book that elaborates on that. The mule is called Max, and she rescued 3 dwarven miners years ago, pulling them out of the mines after unvented gases exploded. A neat world-building piece most of the players probably gonna miss. Anyways, the mines are full of Krug and scorpions for some reason. You know, the famous 3 feet tall giant cave scorpions. Well, maybe there's a lot more oxygen in Dungeon Siege World's atmosphere. Maybe this is a product of some wicked magic. Apart from usual enemy roster, there's rock beasts with AoE damage attacks, some kind of demons, and baby spice worms? Beware of explosive barrels, by the way, they can one-shot you easily. Even though the mines have branching paths, they are still quite linear and it's hard to get lost here. Overall, it's a fine if a bit generic location, but one element is probably gonna piss you off: the moving platforms. They are very small and sometimes move automatically. Even placing all your party members on a lever-triggered lift is not easy. In case of platforms that move up and down or back and forth by themselves, it's a real pain. Well, at the very least you can hit the pause, disengage following mode, select every character one by one, and order them to move on the platform while pausing. That's some pro tips for you. Trying to do it casually, so to speak, is probably not gonna work most of the times, due to how tiny most platforms are, and if your party gets split, enemies gonna have much easier time incapacitating or killing them. Some platforms do transport you right in the thick of it, so be careful. Occasionally we come across some steampunkish machinery and interiors, because you know the dwarves. These rooms deep in the mines are particularly interesting. It's a pity they aren't used in any meaningful way though. At the end of the long journey through the mines, we rescue the lost brother, Tog, whom you can find almost next to the exit. He prompts us to pass the word to the overseer, but we're going to meet him anyway, so okay. After ascending from the mines, we get to a completely different biome. Either it's far north, high up in the mountains, or both, but there's snow all around here. It's a place where that dungeon siege feeling is probably gonna hit you. You realize you're out in the wilds, in the middle of nowhere, in a frozen snowy forest, far from your home in the green lush farmlands. The nearest town is quite close actually, but you have no way of knowing it first time around, because there's no overworld map, remember. Pretty sure I won't be able to convey this feeling because I'm not eloquent at all, and the video format doesn't help much either. But the ones who know, they know. Soon enough we arrive at Glacian. It's time for looking around the town, which of course consists of 5-6 buildings, usual shopping routine, and hiring more fighters in the tavern. There's some generic side quests as well, of course. Funny enough, the most unusual one is about collecting books. Basically, it seems like a sloppy attempt to get you familiar with the lore a bit, and of course it doesn't quite work. But this 3-volume opus is one of the more substantial ones. When I was a kid I wasn't interested in these lore dumps at all, and it's not very enticing now, but it would be interesting to speculate what Dungeon Siege universe could have been if the series wasn't dead in the water. Here our party reaches the size limit. In this playthrough I hired another warrior and a battle mage in Glacian. It's not that the mage gonna be particularly useful, he's most likely gonna be a burden for us even. But I like having all available classes in the party, and most slots are gonna be occupied by melee characters anyway. The mule is gonna travel with us a little bit further, but I'll be more than happy to replace him with another warrior as soon as I can. The overseer gives us new tasks: find out what the hell happened to the Grand Mage Merik, and reinforce the fortress Kroth, which he says is just beyond the ice caves. No, it's not just the caves. It's several locations, including 2 most annoying ones between Glacian and Fortress Kroth. But oh well, like we have a choice. Since the Grand Mage disappeared the day the Krug started insurgents, these events might be somehow connected. And of course they are. On our way to Alpine Caverns we clear Olof's basement, which is like 3 times bigger than the house itself. Kill more forest creatures while shimmering snow falls all around us, gently covering the bloody carnage. At last a giant door slides up and we enter a pretty vast cavern system. There's a lot of ice-themed things here, like ice flies, ice spiders, ice humanoids, ice drakes, ice everything. Yetis also make an appearance. Ice people drop ice weapons that deal quite decent damage at this stage of the game, by the way. Not sure how it's supposed to work, but okay. Some monsters here are quite tough, mainly icemen, and they come in large numbers too, so beware. Mages were taking a nap every so often, slowing down the whole party. What can I say, I'm not surprised. Frost drakes have quite a lot of HP, so you can kinda consider them mini-bosses, but they do not pose a real threat. If you're playing the generic fantasy setting bingo though, you're probably very close to winning at this point. Also, it's here where all my mana potions were gone. I had to switch to less damaging but more cheaper spells. Since experience you get is affected by how much damage you deal, my idea was to use more expensive but more damaging spells until mana potions run out. Moreover, the summons I used before became too weak to fight the monsters we were facing. I had arguably more powerful summons available, a skeleton and a scorpion, but the skeleton is so damn slow it's borderline useless, and the scorpion summon time is kinda short, so I decided to stick with the older spells. They were not very useful at this point, but I needed more damage to level up my mages faster. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not entirely sure if it's how it works, but from my previous experience, it seems like this way Zed and Lauren level up faster. Deep in the ice caves, we find Grand Mage Merik entrapped in ice and surrounded by the icy folk. He tells us that the evil forces were after his staff, took it away and turned him into an icicle. Perhaps this very stuff might be a part of why the current calamity is happening. And honestly, it's still not very clear to me who did that and why Merik is here, far away from the castle of Ebb. I mean, currently the goblins possess the stuff, but did they do it or stole from somebody else? Well, who cares? Merik offers help in retrieving the stuff, but our magic will do squat is exceeded, so thanks for your offer, Merik. We will call you back later. What? No phones in middle-age fantasy setting? Well, tough luck. After exiting the ice caves, we come across Jiraiya's trading outpost. The guy is not very welcoming. Keeping in mind we're literally in the middle of nowhere, in a gorge between two mountain ridges, traversable only via vast caverns underneath them, filled with all kinds of monsters. Well, he should know better than that. It's not like he has a lot of customers here.
Now, if there's anything else I can get you today, maybe I'll consider not tossing your ugly butt out into the snow!
Yeah, what a charmer he is. Well, anyway, after restocking and taming the desire to beat the living shit out of Jiraiya, our heroes enter the Crystal Caves. The Crystal Caves are quite beautiful but dangerous. Monsters here look small and silly but deal a lot of damage. And those walking crystal things can shoot you from a respectable distance, and it's hard to tell them apart from the scenery. Aside from infuriating crystals, there's yet another half-sentient race here, the Trog, quite tough guys, and another variety of underground worm/dragon things called Siriusi. They deal plenty of AoE damage, so look out. Somewhere in the depth of Crystal Caves, a secret location is hidden. After solving a simple pressure plates puzzle, you get the Fury's Eye, a shield-sized item that is necessary to unlock the secret chicken Easter egg level in multiplayer mode and completely useless otherwise. We will talk about it later cause we have a stuff to find. After defeating two giant purple crystals at the exit, finally a breath of fresh air, literally and figuratively. A new location, dark forest, and a traveler's camp where we can refresh our supplies and get more side quests. Entering the traveler's camp signifies reaching the middle of the game. Like here, see, it's in the dead center. In the camp full of colorful tents and people with weird accent, not as weird as mine though, we get a couple of more quests, reject a ranger lady who wants to join us, because we're still in search of melee fighter, sell the loot and restock potions, which we're gonna be needing a lot more from here on. Yeah. After leaving the camp, we realize that the shit gets real. Monsters get more tough and the bandits... Oh, the bandits. Numerous and strong, they were about to kick our asses several times. Of course, as always, the mages suffered the most. The Dark Forest itself looks kinda cool and moody. In fact, the game succeeds in creating an impression of thick forests pretty well. Much better than, let's say, Titan Quest, even though Titan Quest been released 4 years after Dungeon Siege. It indisputably looks better, so very impressive for a 2002 game, no doubt. Sound design is spot on too. Wind, rain, singing birds, crackling trees, occasional howling of wolves. We get through this thick dark forest, helping the caravan guys to get rid of the bandits and chugging potions like there's no tomorrow. Deep in the woods there's a temple look-alike building, occupied by bandits. Why is it here? Is it a removed quest left over, or was it supposed to be what it is? Just an abandoned temple most players probably gonna miss? In any case, it's cool to discover things like that. Beyond the dark forest lies the eastern swamp. Wait, eastern relative to what? Looking at the map, the swamps are in the dead center of Ab. The castle Ab is even farther east, so is Glacier the most important town in the kingdom? Why is the capital way over there then? Well, sorry, I'm thinking too much. Video games, who cares? Maybe I'm just postponing one of the most frustrating moments of the game. Well, let's get over with it. For starters, I was all out of potions upon arrival at the swamps. Well, that's clearly my fault, and I got punished for that by backtracking all the way to the camp. Luckily, it's not that far. After a short back trip, here we are, prepared. The swamps are full of water with occasional solid ground spots, connected with wooden causeways. Of course, you can't drown here because, again, video games. And that's good, since drowning in the bog is one of my inmost fears. But the devs still managed to make the swamps terrifying by completely different means. Let's dive in. Pathfinding is not very good in Dungeon Siege in general, but here it's terrible. Usually locations are not very complex, so it's not a problem most of the times. Well, it's a problem here. The eastern swamp is swarmed with annoying enemies. Some of them are very small, some of them blend with the background, some of them big, but all of them are strong. Well, witches are not strong, but they summon strong stuff and they come in groups of 3 and 4, and you can never kill them before they conjure a 1000 HP swarm creature or something like that. And the summons stay even when the summoner is dead. And usually there's also a shit ton of small monsters running around. And your party members often chase them all over the map, aggroing even more monsters. And the shit cycle continues. I mean, I didn't have a lot of problems here because I'm such a Dungeon Siege pro. But I had enough party members killed to get pissed off anyway. I remembered this place being frustrating, so I took my time, I was careful, and I had enough health potions to potion spam my way through tough situations. Oh, and there's also another worm/dragon looking thing variety here, and it deals pretty hefty AoE damage. So if you're not careful enough, this thing can take the whole party down. Fun times. Well, it's a bit sad because again, the locations look cool. There's even a graveyard and a chapel amidst these godforsaken swamps for some reason. I mean, it's a very strange place to build a chapel and to bury people, but it looks dope. There's also a bunch of zombies and gargoyles around, and you have a side quest in which you need to purify the chapel. Neat. At some point you begin to notice pipes protruding from the bog. It means that the goblin dungeon is close. Not far from the entrance there's a potions lady.
Ooh, the fancy folk have come anew from...
It's very convenient because we're about to get our ass handed to us by goblins in a couple of minutes. Large potion bottles are available now, so it's like the devs meant no more messing around. Boy oh boy, we're about to enter the most butthurt inducing location in the game. Do cool kids still say butthurt, by the way? Leave your answer in the comment section, it's very important. Anyway, the goblin dungeon. Oh well, like we have a choice. At the edge of the swamps there's a giant tree stump with an entrance beneath it. The entrance leads to a vast underground cave system inhabited by small green dudes, the goblins. The location has steampunk aesthetics with valves, pipes, steam-powered machinery and robots and tanks and firearms. The first encounter shows that goblins are pretty sturdy little buggers, again pretty dangerous despite their size. But right behind the first platform there's heaters, essentially flamethrower tanks. These tanks are quite a pain in the ass because they deal heavy AoE damage. The further we go, the more stuff there is. At some point we meet gobbers, you know, goblins plus robots, gobbers. They wield different guns like handheld flamethrower, Tesla cannon aka shotgun, grenade freaking launcher and dragon minigun. A minigun in my fantasy game? Wrap me up 2 of these. Eventually enemies drop firearms so you can get your hands on them, but the requirements are pretty wacky. Essentially the guns are ranged weapons, which makes sense, but some of them require relatively high intelligence or strength, which is not marksman forte in this game. At some point your ranged characters will get the stats they need to equip these weapons, and they are pretty cool, though become understated shortly after. Also, firearms require fuel, which is essentially a cooldown mechanic, because fuel replenishes by itself over time. They could have just straight out called it overheating, and it would make a lot more sense than fuel that magically restores in a fuel tank. The mechanic itself is probably meant to balance out these weapons. Well, yeah, they're pretty strong, but not for long anyway. Okay, back to the dungeon. At first it seems fine. The design is cool, goblin machinery crafted of steel and wood is neat. I really dig the art direction. Sometimes there's pretty nonsensical valve puzzles, you just got the poisonous gas off. There's even a cool goblin canteen here. Such details are always nice to have. The encounters are a little bit tough, but not too much. Yeah, enemies are strong, bridges are narrow, but it feels like a natural difficulty progression. The pace slows to a crawl after a while though, and the more you advance, the more shit hits the fan. Battle tanks proper appear. These are not as dangerous as hitters, but have twice as much health. Oh, look, goblins even have copter drones. Yeah, now it's truly modern warfare. At some point the slew of enemies becomes overwhelming. The devs throw everything at you, a host after host of annoying combinations of annoying enemies. Mages die like every 5 minutes. Potions run out faster than free beer at a student's party, and it's just not very fun, and it goes on and on and on. At some point I was out of potions. I've tried to compensate the absence of potions with magic. I have a healer after all, but alas, mages were getting knocked down first most of the times. So I had to make a tough decision. I needed to go all the way back to the swamps to restock potions. Yes, I knew something like that was going to happen, but still underestimated how many potions it would require. Okay, don't you love backtracking? Anyway, I'm back. Oh look, a platform. On the other side there are tons of enemies and we have to engage them all at once. I can't lure them out one by one. The only approach is to face them head on. And of course they take down the healer with one hit again. Oh, and a couple of minutes later a healer dies again. And our marksman dies too. And the equipment falls on them and get mixed together on the ground. Fun times. Oh look, a secret location. Actually, it's the first time I discovered this. I missed it every time before. Another quote-unquote puzzle. You just have to activate 3 braziers to get to the secret chamber. A couple of 100 defeated enemies and a couple of dead mages later, there is a room. It's just another room actually, but the enemy placement almost ensures a couple of your characters being one-shotted. Well, this approach doesn't work. Let's try to lure them out. Only they don't care about that, because it's hard to lure out ranged AI. Okay, slowly. Ah shoot, both mages are dead again. That's a lot of resurrecting today. Anyway, the room is cleared, but there's another one behind a big door. Guess what happens? Almost as soon as we set feet inside, the half of the party is dead. That was enough for the day. I actually rage quitted here. But the video goes on. Keep in mind, I've almost burned through my health potions yet again. Yikes. I really didn't want to go all the way back to the swamps. Like, really. So this time I had no option but to rely on mages' healing abilities, saving potions to heal them. And look, there's a boss. Finally. There's no better way to conclude a steampunk segment with something other than a goblin mecha fight. Yay. The boss is actually not that hard, but the first time he killed my healer right away, and without healing spells and health potions the rest of the party weren't far behind. The second time Zed, the healer, was spared, So everything went fine. The mecha falls apart, the quote-unquote pilot escapes, but we don't care because we got what we came for, the Staff of Stars. Looks like the goblins stole the staff to power their stuff. I wonder what energy source they used before. Anyway, the staff is ours and it has good stats, a unique model, but other than that it's just a staff. Of course, the exit out of the massive cave system is just around the corner. We ascend from the depths of the Goblins' Cave, and end up on a seashore. And there's a couple of 10th Legion soldiers here, chilling on the beach, talking about tentacles and other nonsense. I'm not gonna lie, although in general surroundings look good in Dungeon Siege, shores and riverbanks look awful even with mods. Talking about mods, probably they caused a game crash again. Shit happens. After clearing the shore one more time, we discover a trading post, which is very helpful. Usual routine: selling stuff, buying stuff, acquiring another side quest. Some poor adventurers seem to be lost in some dungeon. The merchants apparently are more concerned with the equipment adventurers have on them than adventurers' lives. I don't mind checking them out, it's along our way. The dungeon is intricate and deadly, full of small but annoying monsters and tentacles. Its purpose is not very clear. There's also another hidden location that looks like an abandoned goblins facility. To complete the quest, we need to return to merchants, but I don't mind. They give us gold, not needed at this point, but I'm more than happy to restock potions. Again, I could have used healing spells more, but they give little to no experience, and it means slower leveling for mages, which is not good. Also, I can't be bothered to switch spells often enough. The way to Fortress Croth lies through some temple ruins. Because everything is connected through some undead-ridden ruins in this world, apparently. No one even tells the name of this temple. No one even cares about the goddamn plot anymore, because it's the endgame essentially. Maybe there's a book that contains information about it, but at this point new books can only be found in inventory of new recruits, and we haven't hired anyone in a long time. The ruins are full of undead, obviously, another variety of scary huge worms, some kind of larvae, and beholders? They are called fury spawns here, but come on. By the way, these beasts can melt your health pretty quick, and a giant one is a boss here. Behold. Not scary, by the way. At this stage, standard encounters are way harder than location bosses. Upon exiting the temple underground, we meet a mage, who's eager to join our party, but we decline. Between us and Fortress Croth, there's only a couple of hundred undead soldiers. These are much tougher than regular skeletons and drop pretty good plate armor. After a while we discover who's responsible for that. The Necromancer Gresh. Again, he's not too hard per se, but summons a few skeletons. Also, he locks us in an improvised arena. I believe it's the only time bosses do something like that. When Gresh is dead, the way to Fortress Croth opens. The fortress. This wooden structure, surrounded by a pretty shallow moat, is a bit pathetic even by Dungeon Siege standards. Anyway, the fortress, though damaged, is still standing. It has been besieged by the undead and the Droog, another sentient race, for days, and we've just solved one of the problems. The undead is undead, or simply dead now, so Fortress Commander sends us to subdue the Droog. Also, we found another melee fighter here, Root the Knight. Sorry Flare, we have to part ways. We're very close to the end of the game, the tensions are rising, and the pack mule was more of a hindrance so far, sadly, so we leave him in Fortress Croth. Usual restocking routine, and off we go. The exit from Fortress Croth lies through the caves. There's lots of Droog here. Nah, not these ones. The blue-haired, brown-skin kind of Droog. Humanoid enemies tend to be tougher than beasts in Dungeon Siege. The Droog are not exception, but nothing compares to the Goblin Dungeon. Nothing. On our way to Castle Ebb, we decide to check out the Hall of Skulls. The entrance is covered by a giant, well, skull, and the dungeon itself is full of, well, skulls. There's also Droog here, but mainly it's giant flying skulls. Reminds me of Doom. You can loot sepulchres, but most interesting person here is a woman held hostage by the Droog for some reason. It's Secra. She's one of the travelers, you know, the ones from the camp. What's interesting about her is that she has a hybrid class. Level 20 nature magic and level 38 combat magic. Of course you can hire her, but I see no reason to. Having a character who can do both nature and combat magic might sound useful, but I'm tired enough constantly switching spells just for one school of magic at a time, and I'm definitely not gonna dismiss melee characters. Sorry Secra, enjoy your stay at the Hall of Skulls. On the other side of the caves there's canyons and a river. Nice location if not for the slew of enemies. The Droog sometimes ambush you hiding literally in the sand. So if you see a nice place devoid of enemies, prepare to be drooged. Yeah, it's a word now. We get higher and higher up the canyons until we arrive at the Cliffs of Fire. The Droog village is located there. Most villagers kneel down before us and don't attack. There are small pockets of resistance, but it's nothing. At the top of the village, a person who seems to be in charge here tells us that the Droog basically fell victim of the sect propaganda, but now they realized the error of their ways and now have nothing against humans. Why did you attack us a couple of minutes earlier then? Ultraviolence and shit, huh? Well, at least we can trade with them, which is handy. Upon exiting the village, another friendly guy tells us that they have a dragon problem. The ancient big badass dragon of Wraith sends her minions to harass the Droog. The sect convinced the Droog that it was of humans doing at first, but now they realize that the true cause is probably the sect themselves. As ritual sacrifices didn't help, the only way to solve the problem is to kill the dragon, lest he gets out of the Wraith and devastates the entire kingdom. Conveniently enough, the Wraith is not far from here, and the dragon, well, it's just a huge drake with tons of HP that stays completely stationary the whole fight. Yay. Keep calm and hit that goddamn health potion hotkey repeatedly until it's over. And by the way, the mods probably screwed the dragon here, so she keeps disappearing. Of course, any dragon cave should be full of treasures, and Dungeon Siege conforms to this rule. There's a whole bunch of stuff, but it's more like random loot than proper treasure though. Having dealt with the dragon, we continue through another cave. We exit the cave and find ourselves in familiar surroundings. We almost came full circle, as you can see on the map. The environment here matches the environment in the farmlands. Makes sense, the first and almost final locations are in the same climate zone. Seems like we're late, the land here is devastated too. Lots of skeletons roam the country, and the castle Ebb is ransacked by the Sec. Don't forget to visit a hedge maze you can find right before the castle entrance. Could have been a nice, serene place if not for the skeletons. The castle itself, yet beautiful, is confusing as hell. It should be a nightmare for castle dwellers and servants to navigate around it. Of course, we're gonna have to scour through the whole castle, looting chests and killing Sec, only to make another circle so we can access a strategically placed dungeon lift. At first, we fight through what seems to be an armory and living quarters in the dungeon. Eventually, we find the king in the prison section. He prompts us to kill the Sec who a long time ago were imprisoned in the Vault of Eternity beneath the very castle lab, which is smart. Turns out our ancestors, instead of dealing with the Sec for good, decided to entomb powerful and probably immortal wizards beneath their main castle. Sounds like a good idea. Of course their hubris backfired. At the moment the warden staff was removed from the castle and thus the ward weakened, they broke out and besieged the castle from within. The king gives us a key to fancy schmancy magical arsenal, sends us to fight the whole Sec army. Yeah, don't miss a merchant down in the prison, it probably won't to restock again. Funny enough, I've reached the gold limit here, it's 10 million max in Dungeon Siege. Well, 10 million minus 1, this number. Yeah, gold became irrelevant long time ago, but now I can't even scratch the compulsive hoarder itch, because there's no point in selling stuff. We're too rich. Off we go again. First we clear a very vast prison section with lots of torture devices, and one can even start to wonder who is the real baddie here. We deal with the mad jailer, another side quest, and enter the Chamber of Stars. After activating 4 switches we get 4 chests with pretty high level items inside. I found a pretty strong rainbow sword, for example. I wonder how many high level legendary items that 90% of players have never even seen exist in Dungeon Siege. Probably a lot. We make a few steps further and here it is, the break in the wall. And this is the last stretch, the road to the final boss, the Sec Commander Gom. If you happen to know Russian slang, you can put these 2 words together in a not very YouTube friendly way. Anyhow, from now on the surroundings turn into a hellish landscape. The pools of lava, spiky black rocks and demon-looking creatures. The mages kept dying every couple of minutes, of course. Lauren was especially unlucky this time. By the end of the game, and especially in the last stretch, resurrecting mages constantly becomes such a chore. Resurrect, heal up, re-equip the gear, switch weapons, resurrect, heal, re-equip, switch, resurrect, heal. Come on already. Our party was chugging potions like crazy as usual, so I used that mainly for healing, to conserve mana potions. Yeah, as expected his leveling slowed down to a crawl, but at this point it didn't really matter. I certainly didn't want to backtrack to a merchant again. At the very end surroundings become especially intimidating. Just you listen. Spooky. At long last, the end of our journey, the final boss. And he sucks. He has 2 phases, the first form is super weak, the second one is somewhat stronger. He summons increasingly annoying monsters, but with healing wind and occasional chugging of health potions, it all was a piece of cake. The ancient evil is defeated and the game just drops to the main menu. Well, it's not how it's supposed to be, it's a bug of vanilla Steam and GOG versions. I do have a footage from Legends of Aranna fix, unmodded version, but it's just a text on a black screen anyway, there's not even a cutscene. A bit lame. The corners were cut, I suppose. After that you regain control of your party, but there's nothing much to do. You can just grab the loot that fell off the boss so you can use it in multiplayer. Congratulations, I guess. Dungeon Siege has a multiplayer mode as well, and it's a somewhat unusual case. Let me explain. Multiplayer mode uses completely separate, although built from mostly the same assets map, the Utrain Peninsula. It seems like this map is even bigger and way less linear than a single player one. It's not an open world map of course, but you're not locked to a single route to your destination, and not even locked to destination itself. It's probably dictated by how the multiplayer mode works. You can't save your progress, but you keep items in your inventory. In order to beat the game in multiplayer, you have to collect 8 items, so you can unlock the final location and defeat the final enemy wave. Every time you re-enter the game, the map resets, but you keep your inventory items. Thus, these 8 items are a way to keep your main quest progress. Given the map is vast, you can start in any of 8 towns if you have high enough level. You can either create a new character for multiplayer or import one from single player. Upon completing the single player campaign, your character is probably gonna be around level 54. That's gonna be sufficient to start in any Utrain Peninsula town on regular world difficulty. It's not that there's much sense in it, since you're gonna be able to one-shot most enemies at that level. But in addition to gameplay difficulty setting, there's world difficulty in multiplayer, regular, veteran, elite. It doesn't add new enemy types, but makes the existing ones stronger, and they drop better loot in the result. You can host your own game and play multiplayer alone, but you can't control multiple characters. I can imagine starting a new character and playing alone can be quite hard, and one-shotting everything with an existing one on regular difficulty can be quite boring. So maybe you can have fun on world difficulties beyond regular, but it seems the mode is balanced around multiple people playing. You can't really lose in multiplayer. If you die, you resurrect either after 1 minute or immediately after touching the resurrection shrine. But keeping in mind simplistic combat system, I can't imagine solo playthrough being very interesting. On the contrary, playing with friends might be quite fun, and there's even a PvP mode available. Multiplayer in theory makes mage experience better, because one can focus on magic shenanigans while having wider spell selection, and everything is more fun with friends, I think. Due to the vastness of the game world and inability to save progress, teleportation system was introduced. Yeah, teleporters break the road trip flow, but they're absolutely necessary for the multiplayer experience. The plot is even less prominent, it's just let's collect the 8 stones and activate the thing, oh no, it's gone wrong, kill the final wave of monsters, and that's it. Voice lines are absent, but the gameplay is mostly the same as in single player, you're just on your own. There's a whole bunch of equipment and spells, essentially available only in this mode, due to the high level requirements. Thus, if you'd like to experience all game content, you have to play multiplayer several times, because there's no other way of high level progression. So, if you're a lone wolf like me and you just want to explore Ukraine Peninsula in proper single player, you can install the Ukraine Peninsula single player mod UPSP for short, which does exactly what the title suggests it does. You can save game, hire companions, and essentially you get a free full-size add-on, yet with slightly different gameplay. The linearity of the original campaign meant that your level was always matched with your enemy's level, and no backtracking was required unless you made something wonky. It's not the case with UPSP. The map layout might seem confusing and some enemies be too strong for low-level characters, but it still means more Dungeon Siege content. It's hard to recommend soloing multiplayer or playing UPSP to everyone, yet there's some locations it would be a shame to miss. I'm talking about lost pyramids in a literally endless desert, a secret pathway that transports the player almost all the way through Peninsula, a secret quote-unquote hell level, and a perilous ominous dark labyrinth. Discovering such places on your own would be a much better experience, perhaps even somewhat esoteric, and refreshing, given the overall simplistic design of the game, so here's a spoiler warning. There's hopefully gonna be a time code on the screen somewhere so you can safely skip the spoilers. Okay, there's a treat on the map for those who like exploring every nook and cranny. Somewhere in the northern Great Forest you can find 2 enormously tall towers. There's nothing particularly interesting about the towers themselves, apart from their height, but in one of the towers there's an elevator. Sort of. In fact, it brings you all the way to the eastern island, so it turns out to be a part of the ancient Ukraine transport system or something. The island itself is hauntingly beautiful, yet abandoned and uninhabited. From here you can take a path to another tower, with another platform that gets you down to the freaking hell. Well, it's just volcanic caverns in fact, but there's lava everywhere and it looks stereotypically hellish. Not just that, but there's also a bunch of endgame monsters roaming around, so be sure your level is high enough. Essentially, it's a place where you can farm experience and equipment. But that's not all. On the other side of the island there's an entrance to a tunnel. The tunnel is quite long and desolated, and on the other side of it there's one of the lost pyramids. Tunnel, despite being long, can't possibly stretch for such a long distance, so apparently there's magic involved. Lost pyramids are located somewhere in the endless dunes, and you should not be skeptical. They are truly endless. The map just endlessly loops here to create an impression of humongously vast desert. The pyramid the tunnel leads to is called the Lost Pyramid of the Soul. There's another one close by, the Lost Pyramid of the Dead, and inside of it there's an elevator that takes you down to the volcanic caverns as well, only on the other side of it. Aside from a couple of very vague dialogue lines, nothing in the whole game points to these towers and pyramids, and that's beautiful. The towers in the Great Forest are not easy to come across, not to mention the location itself is not easy to traverse. As to pyramids, you'll only be given a vague direction by a desert town's dweller, and they're even harder to find this way because the desert loops and has little to none landmarks. Such stuff is very easy to miss and very rewarding to discover by yourself. Another quite interesting location is the Pit of Despair. Somewhere in the Redwood Forest there's a depression in the ground that looks like an abandoned mine shaft. There's multiple signs warning you not to enter, but if you dare to descend in the murky depths of the Pit of Despair, you would plunge into a complicated and dark labyrinth with several puzzles. It's huge, empty and ominous. It's not impossible and probably not very hard by itself, but pitch black darkness makes it way harder. I'm not gonna lie, I haven't even tried to navigate the labyrinth by myself. Thankfully, there's a very helpful Dungeon Siege wiki article, so you can clear the challenge with relative ease. The reward is random loot and a silly looking paper helmet, with decent stats nonetheless. It's not much, especially if you somehow beat it without a guide, but the scale of this optional dungeon in an optional game mode is impressive. Too bad there's nothing like that in single player. Somewhere in the Great Northern Forest there's also a location with relatively high level monsters, clearly designed for farming purposes. Even keeping in mind such locations, despite its size, multiplayer map sometimes feels too empty. Don't get me wrong, there's places to explore, views to be seen, and overall it showcases what Dungeon Siege could have been if the game weren't so linear. Finally, let's talk about the Easter egg secret level. In order to gain access to it, you need 3 items: the knife that you got at the very beginning of the game and probably sold right away, the aforementioned Fury's Eye, and a book from the endgame dungeon. It's quite cryptic and I don't see how you'd be aware of it without a guide. Also keep in mind that the knife can only be acquired through starting a new game in single player mode. You can't buy it or loot from anywhere. The secret level itself is a room full of giant chickens, named after Dungeon Siege developers. Don't be fooled by those looks. They're very tough but drop best loot in the game. I've killed a couple, but it took me way more time and potions to be comfortable to acknowledge it. It's a cool place to grind high level gear, I suppose, but it's not exactly a riveting experience. It's weird that you can play on the original map in multiplayer but not vice versa. Maybe the developers didn't have time to make it playable in single player because the game was already behind schedule. Maybe it was meant to be this way from the beginning, but we have what we have. And yeah, multiplayer also requires the Legends of Aranna fix I've mentioned before. It won't work at all otherwise. Dungeon Siege The Legends of Aranna, or Aranna, is an official Dungeon Siege expansion made by Mad Dog Software and released in 2003. It didn't introduce much of new stuff. A lot of assets from the original game were used, but new content was added as well: additional single player map and campaign, new playable races, new spells, new creatures, backpacks, new gear, and some quality of life improvements, such as a share potion button so managing potions becomes a little bit easier, DPS stat for weapons and spells so you don't have to pull out calculator every time you pick up a new weapon. But most importantly, now you can see your Uber level in single player. Groundbreaking, I know. Notably, set items mechanic has also been added. The more items from a given set you collect, the more powerful the whole set becomes. Most of these changes were backported, so to speak, to the original game. Backpacks remained exclusive for expansion though, and I'd say it's not a big deal. Yeah, they expand your inventory, but not by much and are quite awkward to use. According to the game wiki, devs changed the way armor works, so in a sense the whole original campaign was rebalanced as consequence. I've no easy way to check it, but some encounters from the base campaign do seem harder in the original game version, than in the updated expansion version and vice versa. New utility spells like Transmute All or Transmute to Health Potion also make life easier. In the Legends of Aranna campaign you can now monitor your progress via the overworld map. It looks not very pretty and doesn't tell you much, but it's nice to have anyway. One can argue that it takes away the terrain cognitive feel of the game, but at least the map uncovers gradually. Another addition that makes your life easier but affects the flow of the game is teleporters. Yeah, they were absolutely necessary in multiplayer, but although they make your journey easier in linear single-player campaign as well, your, so to speak, pit stops in towns become less significant and different locations doesn't feel as remote anymore. Also, it's hard to ignore that the teleporters, or displaces as they are called here, are essentially glorified lifts, and the whole teleportation process feels wonky. It's as if the devs were not able to code them properly and implemented a workaround. Well, maybe it's just me. As to the story, on one hand it feels more fleshed out, but on the other still cliched as hell. It's the same ancient evil escaped from its prison thing all over again. We start in the town of Arhok in the Kingdom of Ab, from which the great artifact the Staff of Stars again was stolen from, and sail to the islands of Ukrainians. Judging by the original multiplayer campaign, the Ukrainians were supposed to be a long-gone advanced ancient civilization, so either the events take place years before the original game plot, or I'm thinking too much. Anyway, Ukrainians are actually not completely gone, but their civilization's in shambles, most advanced high-tech stuff long forgotten, great cities in ruin. It seems like Ukrainians were trying to play gods once, but in the hubris they sowed the seeds of their own demise. Via genetic manipulations they created two sentient races from cats and lizards, so these people would serve them, but it all ended up with rebellion and the Ukrainian Empire fall. Thus, the Atreians are definitely not the unquestionably good guys here, but we still have to help them because the local villain called Shadow Jumper, has escaped from their prison and he is to destroy the whole world. Because why not? At the center of the island there's the Great Clock, which controls weather, and Shadow Jumper intends to use the Staff of Stars to mess with the clock and to destroy everything. We fight through jungles, forests and deserts of Ukraine Island to the Great Clock Tower. The Hassat and the Zaurask, two races created by Ukrainians, are not very happy to see us and definitely don't want the Ukrainians to be helped. Essentially, we correct the Ukrainians' mistakes. Maybe they repent now, but at the peak of the power they were definitely arrogant schmucks. Just look at the result of one of their experiments. This abomination was a human once and now we have to put an end to her. It's misery. Parallel to the main plot, we uncover the story of our characters' parents. No one knows what happened to them, but throughout our journey we pick up pieces of their equipment that make the armor set named Arhok slot. Closer to the end of the game, we discover their graves. Turns out they were killed during Zaurask rebellion by hulking Lizard King. You can avenge them if you like. Overall, much more attention was paid to the story this time. There's a lot of lore pieces scattered across the world, even though the game's engine makes lore delivery awkward. In the end, the story isn't great, it's just serviceable. But an attempt was made, I guess. The expansion itself is serviceable as well. It's essentially the same thing, but with some improvements. Not a fan of teleporters though. Oh, almost forgot. There's an Easter egg here as well. After beating the game, a lift, not far from the final room, becomes active. There's a secret disco party going on down there. Also you can get a fancy hat and a very nice defensive spell from an NPC. The spell itself conjures a chicken from hell that shoots deadly eggs at your enemies. Why does it always has to be chickens? Return to Arhok is once again a little bit more of the same. A very short free DLC, events of which take place several years after the Legends of Aranna campaign. The Arhok residents didn't figure anything better than to put their hero in some sort of stasis, along with the Staff of Stars. The hero agreed for some reason. Now, when the town is harassed by Hassad, they decide to defrost him. The hero awakes with skills erased by years of slumber, and the stuff falls apart. The dude named Rowan gives us instructions, we get some equipment, gain some experience via special scrolls, hire some companions and once again save the day. Turns out the Hassad were forced out of the land by another genetically modified lizard leader Rex, the king was captured and they just want their land back and the king freed. To save our town we need to help them, cause otherwise they will make Arhok their new home. After a short trip to the Ukraine island and a small dungeon, we kill Rex, Rowan, who turns out to be a traitor, and that's it. It's a 1 hour long DLC and there's nothing to write home about. Return to Arhok is quite easy to beat, if you're fine with returning to the town periodically, to hire all the available companions and buy potions, but might be challenging if you choose it to be a one-way trip. So backtracking is almost necessary. It's not bad per se, but being sort of ripped out of the larger Dungeon Siege campaign experience, the short expansion never gets interesting and brings nothing new. Yesterhaven is another official DLC, about 3-4 times larger than Return to Arhok, and it definitely deserves some attention. This time it's a multiplayer mode map, designed to be played with newly created characters. It takes about 3-4 hours and tells the story of a long abandoned Empire of Stars hamlet called Yesterhaven. As you might have guessed, it involves traveling back in time. Doing so, you will help Yesterhaven people to untangle a quarrel between supernatural beings that put their settlement in big trouble. It's a short but compelling story and one of the best, if not the best, piece of content in original Dungeon Siege story-wise. I won't be spoiling the plot because other than that, Yesterhaven doesn't have much to offer, apart from maybe a little bit more advanced scripting outside cutscenes. Whoa, the video turned out to be longer than I expected. Maybe too long for its own good. Anyway, if you're still here, either you've fallen asleep or you're just tied to a chair for some reason. If that's the case, I'm really sorry. Or maybe you actually liked the video. If I managed to interest you in Dungeon Siege, then the ultimate goal is achieved. Yay! I always thought that the series deserves way more attention than it was getting, even when it wasn't dead in the water. Of course, there's gonna be 2 more videos dedicated to the sequels. I genuinely like Dungeon Siege 2 and I'm looking forward to revisiting it. As to the 3rd installment, it's gonna be all the more interesting as I've never played it and heard a lot of criticism towards it. It's also quite short, so it can't be too bad, right? Next video is most likely not gonna be about Dungeon Siege, not sure if it's gonna be about a video game even, but the sequels are definitely in my plans, so stay tuned and consider subscribing if you'd like to see more. It's 2024 currently and there's no sign of serious return. A couple of years ago there were news about Square Enix bringing Dungeon Siege characters in forms of NFTs to the sandbox, metaverse, whatever it may mean. Don't know much about NFTs, metaverses and all that fancy stuff, and I don't care much honestly, but there you are. And yes, I am aware of Uwe Boll film adaptations. I watched the first one and it was extremely bland, lazy and pretty bad in general. Not the worst film ever made though, and probably even not the worst Uwe Boll work, which is not saying much in fact. They say the other 2 are even worse. Judging by the reviews online, it's most likely true, but I can't say for sure. Maybe one day I will make a video about the Dungeon Siege cinema trilogy, but I'm not sure if I hate myself that much. We'll see. Finally, I am aware that my videos sound perfect, to put it lightly, but I'm working on it. Anyway, I'm open to all kinds of criticism towards anything regarding the video. Share your opinions in the comment section, maybe you disagree with something or have something to add, and it's not just interaction bait. I do want my videos to become better, eventually. One day. A man can hope, okay? Well, that's it folks. Thank you very much for watching and take care.